In the abandoned gymnasium of Ridgepoint High School, a quiet transfer student was about to face his breaking point. What started as an after-school fitness assessment took a shocking turn when he came face-to-face with systematic torture disguised as athletic testing. Elijah Eli Cole wasn't your typical high school sophomore. For 8 years, he had spent his life training in underground boxing gyms, known for his devastating precision and unbreakable mental discipline. When he encountered wrestling captain Chase Granger, demanding endless push-ups until collapse, he had no idea he was walking into a calculated campaign of psychological warfare. Eli's decision to endure rather than retaliate would lead to a public reckoning that would expose the true meaning of strength. What began as bullies targeting a seemingly defenseless victim would become a masterclass in controlled power. The halls of Ridgepoint High would never be the same after the quiet boy they tried to break revealed exactly why he had been holding back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Ridgepoint High School as Elijah Cole adjusted his worn backpack and checked his schedule for the 5th time that morning. At 16, Eli had perfected the art of being unremarkable. His lean frame was always hidden beneath long-sleeved shirts and dark hoodies, even in warm weather. His black hair fell just long enough to partially obscure his dark eyes, and he kept his head down when walking through crowded spaces. 3 months since transferring from Lincoln High downtown, and Eli had managed to maintain his carefully constructed anonymity. No friends, no enemies, no drama. Just the way Uncle Ray had taught him to survive in hostile territory. Keep your head down, eyes open, and fists ready, Ray always said. But use your brain first, your mouth second, and your hands only when there's no other choice. Lincoln High had been a war zone. Gan colors, metal detectors, and the constant threat of violence had shaped every interaction. Eli's older brother Marcus had been caught in that cycle, and it had cost him everything. 5 to 10 years in state prison for aggravated assault during a gang fight that had spiraled out of control. Their mother had moved them to Ridgepoint. The next month, desperate to give Eli a fresh start. By second period, Eli was sitting in Mrs. Henderson's American literature class, choosing his usual seat in the back corner. The long-sleeved shirts weren't just for anonymity, they covered the network of small scars that decorated his forearms, reminders of a life he was trying to leave behind. Today we're discussing themes of isolation and belonging in The Outsiders. Mrs. Henderson announced. Can anyone tell me why Ponyboy feels like he doesn't fit in either world? Several hands shot up. Eli knew the answer. He had read the book twice, but he remained silent. Participation meant attention, and attention meant becoming a target. The character feels caught between two worlds, offered Jessica Martinez, one of the theater kids. He's too smart and sensitive for the greasers, but too poor and rough for the soses. As the discussion continued, Eli found himself thinking about Ponyboy's struggle. The parallels weren't lost on him, caught between his violent past and his hopes for a peaceful future. Too damaged for normal teenage life, but too young to give up on the possibility of change. When class ended, Mrs. Henderson called him over. I've been impressed with your written work, she said, holding up his latest essay. Have you considered joining the debate team? Or perhaps the literary magazine? The suggestion hit Eli like a physical blow. Joining clubs meant commitment, visibility, regular interaction with other students. It meant dropping his carefully maintained defenses. I'm not really the joining type, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes the students who think they're not the joining type are exactly the ones who need it most, she replied kindly. Eli nodded noncommittally and headed for his next class. He understood that she meant well, but she couldn't understand the risks involved. Third period brought physical education with Coach Navarro, a stocky man in his 40s with the bearing of someone who had spent time in the military. Today we're starting our fitness assessment unit, he announced from the center of the gymnasium. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a timed mile run. Eli's jaw tightened. Fitness assessments meant individual performance, which meant standing. Out, partner up, Coach Navarro called out. One person performs, one person counts. Students began pairing off naturally. Eli found himself standing alone until the coach assigned him to Jordan Lee, a quiet Asian American kid from his chemistry class who spent most of his time reading or working on chess problems. I'll go first, Jordan said quietly, dropping into push-up position. Jordan managed 15 push-ups before his form deteriorated. When he finished, breathing heavily, he handed Eli the clipboard with obvious embarrassment. Your turn, Jordan said. Eli positioned himself carefully. Muscle memory from hundreds of hours of training with Uncle Ray taking over. Push-ups were fundamental part of every boxing workout, every conditioning session. He had been doing them since he was 8 years old. Go, Jordan said. Eli began with controlled, perfect form. His breathing stayed steady, his back straight, his movements precise. 10, 20, 30 push-ups passed without strain. He could feel other students beginning to notice, conversations quieting as they watched the quiet transfer student performing. With surprising athleticism. 40, 50, 60 push-ups. Eli's muscles burned, but he had learned to work through discomfort years ago. Boxing had taught him that pain was temporary, but giving up was permanent. He could hear whispers now, students pointing and counting along. Damn, someone muttered. Look at the skinny kid go. Eli pushed through 70, 80, 90 push-ups. His form remained perfect, his breathing controlled. Uncle Ray had always emphasized that technique mattered more than raw strength. At 100 push-ups, Eli finally allowed himself to stop. He rose to his feet smoothly, barely winded, and accepted the clipboard from Jordan, who was staring at him with obvious amazement. 100, Jordan announced to Coach Navarro, his voice carrying across the now quiet gymnasium. Coach Navarro looked up from his clipboard, eyebrows raised. 100? You sure about that count, Lee? Yes, sir. Perfect form the whole time. The coach walked over to examine Eli more closely. Where'd you learn to do push-ups like that, Cole? Eli felt the familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. Attention. Questions. Exactly what he had been trying to avoid. Double quotes, just ... Around, he said quietly. Just around doesn't get you to 100 perfect push-ups, Coach Navarro pressed. You play sports at your old school? Not really, Eli replied, which was technically true. Boxing wasn't a school sport at Lincoln High, it was survival training. Well, whatever you've been doing, keep it up. That's the school record for your age group. As the class continued, Eli found himself the reluctant center of attention. Other students who had never noticed him before were now stealing glances and whispering. He performed adequately on the remaining exercises, hoping to dial down the interest his push-up display had generated, but the damage was done. As students filed back to the locker room, Eli overheard fragments of conversation that made his stomach sink. Did you see that transfer kid? He's ripped. 100 push-ups, no joke. Wonder what else he can do. Looks like a fighter to me. Something about the way he moves. This was exactly what Uncle Ray had warned him about. The nail that sticks up gets hammered down, Ray had said. And in high school, kid, there's always someone looking for a nail to hammer. The rest of the day passed in a blur of sideways glances and whispered conversations. By the time the final bell rang, Eli felt like he was walking through a minefield. He made it to his locker without incident, but as he gathered his textbooks, he noticed a group of athletes clustered near the drinking fountain about 20 feet away. Chase Granger, the wrestling team captain, stood at the center of the group. Tall, blonde, with the kind of confident swagger that came from never being told no. Beside him was Logan Phelps, a linebacker who stood nearly 6.5 feet tall, with arms like tree trunks and a permanent scowl. As Eli closed his locker, and shouldered his backpack, he caught Chase's eye. The wrestling captain smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. It was the kind of smile that suggested he had found something interesting, something worth investigating. Eli looked away quickly and headed for the exit, but he could feel their attention following him. He had survived 3 months of anonymity at Ridgepoint High, but one moment of physical excellence had changed everything. Walking home through the quiet suburban streets, Eli thought about Uncle Ray's training philosophy. Boxing isn't about fighting, Ray had always said. It's about control. Control your body, control your mind, control your environment. And most importantly, control your temper. The house was empty when he arrived. His mother wouldn't be home from her double shift at the hospital until late. Eli microwaved leftover pizza and settled at the kitchen table with his homework, but his mind kept drifting to the events of the day. He had broken his own rules. He had stood out, drawn attention, made himself a target. And he could feel the consequences gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. His phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Ray. "How was school today, champ?" Eli stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "Fine, just the usual." But as he returned to his homework, he knew that the usual was about to become a lot more complicated. The next morning brought unseasonable warmth to Ridgepoint, the kind of October day that made students restless. Eli walked to school along his usual route, but he could feel the difference immediately. Students who had never acknowledged his existence before now tracked his movement with curious eyes. By second period, the gossip mill had amplified his fitness assessment performance into something approaching legend. "I heard he did 200 push-ups," one student whispered. "Someone said he used to be in the military," claimed another. The truth was becoming distorted with each retelling, but the core message remained the same. The quiet transfer student was stronger than he looked. It was during 6th period study hall that Chase Granger made his first move. Eli was sitting at a table near the back of the library, working on his calculus homework, when Chase and Logan approached. The wrestling captain moved with the easy confidence of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted, while Logan followed like a loyal attack dog. "Mind if we sit?" Chase asked, but he was already pulling out a chair before Eli could respond. Logan settled into the seat across from Eli with a grunt, his presence immediately making the study space feel cramped and hostile. Other students at nearby tables looked up nervously, then quickly returned to their work. "Eli Cole, right?" Chase said, his voice carrying false friendliness. "I'm Chase Granger, wrestling team captain. This is Logan Phelps, varsity football." Eli nodded but didn't speak. Uncle Ray had taught him to listen more than he talked, especially when dealing with potential threats. "Heard you put on quite a show in gym class yesterday," Chase continued, leaning back with practiced casualness. 100 push-ups, perfect form. Pretty impressive for someone who doesn't look like he's ever seen the inside of a weight room. "It was just a fitness assessment," Eli replied quietly. "Just a fitness assessment," Logan repeated mockingly. "Most kids can barely do 20 push-ups, but you knock out 100 like it's nothing." Chase held up a hand, silencing his companion. "What Logan's trying to say is that we're curious about your background. We've been at Ridgepoint for 3 years, and we know everyone who's anyone in athletics. But you ... you're a mystery." Eli felt the familiar knot of anxiety. This was exactly the kind of attention he had been trying to avoid. "I'm not really into sports," Eli said, finally looking up to meet Chase's eyes. "Not into sports," Chase repeated thoughtfully. "But you've got calluses on your knuckles that look like they came from hitting things. And those scars on your forearms, barely visible, but they're there." Eli's blood ran cold. His long sleeves had ridden up slightly while writing, exposing just enough skin for someone with experience to notice the faint marks left by years of training and street fights. "I don't know what you're talking about," Eli said, pulling his sleeves down. "Course you don't," Logan said with a cruel smile. "Just like you don't know how to do perfect push-ups or why you move like someone who's been in fights." Chase leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "Here's the thing, Eli. This school has a certain ecosystem. Everyone has their place, their role to play. But you're trying to play a different game." "I'm not playing any game," Eli said. "See, that's where you're wrong," Chase continued. "You transferred here 3 months ago, kept your head down, acted like you were just another nobody. But yesterday, you showed everyone that you're not weak, not helpless, and that changes things. I just want to finish high school and move on," Eli said honestly. "And you can," Chase replied. "But first, you need to understand how things work here. When someone new shows up with skills like yours, it raises questions about hierarchy, about who really runs things." Logan cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing in the quiet library, questions that need answers. Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, looked up with a frown. "This is a study hall, gentlemen. Please keep your voices down." "Of course, Mrs. Patterson," Chase said smoothly. "We were just having a friendly conversation about school spirit." When the librarian returned to her work, Chase's smile vanished. "Meet us in the gym after school. East side, near the wrestling mats. We're going to settle this question about your abilities." "I don't want any trouble," Eli said. "Neither do we," Chase said, standing up. "But sometimes trouble finds you. Anyway, 3:30, East Side. Don't be late." Logan stood as well, his massive frame blocking out the overhead lights. "And Cole, don't think about running to the teachers. This is between us." As the two athletes walked away, Eli felt the familiar weight of impending conflict settling over him. He had spent 3 months building a new life, trying to escape the violence and chaos of his past. But the past had a way of catching up. By the time the final bell rang, Eli had made his decision. He would meet them in the gym, but he would try to de-escalate before it turned physical. Uncle Ray had always taught him that the best fights were the ones you never had to fight. The school hallways emptied quickly as students headed for buses and cars. Aylin made his way to the gymnasium, his footsteps echoing in the nearly deserted corridors. The east side was used primarily for wrestling practice, with thick mats covering the floor and championship banners hanging from the walls. Chase and Logan were already there, along with 2 other students Eli didn't recognize. The wrestling captain had changed into athletic clothes, while Logan still wore his regular school attire. The message was clear. Chase expected a physical confrontation. "Punctual," Chase observed as Eli entered the matted area. "I respect that. What do you want?" Eli asked, staying near the edge where he could retreat if necessary. "Simple," Chase said, beginning to pace like a predator. "You've got everyone talking about your little fitness demonstration, but talk is cheap. I want to see what you can really do." "I already told you I'm not into sports," Eli replied. "And I told you that's bullshit," Logan interjected. "Nobody gets that strong without training, without fighting." "You're hiding something." Chase held up a hand. "Here's what's going to happen, Eli. You're going to show us what you're made of. Nothing too serious, just a little demonstration. And if I refuse, then things get complicated," Chase said with a shrug. "Word gets around that the transfer student is all talk. Your reputation takes a hit, and maybe you find yourself dealing with more persistent questions about your background." The threat was clear. Eli could either participate in whatever Chase had planned, or face escalating harassment designed to expose secrets he couldn't afford to reveal. "What kind of demonstration?" Eli asked. "Push-ups," Chase said simply. "You did 100 yesterday. Today, you're going to do them until you can't do anymore. We want to see your real limits." Eli felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't about athletics, it was about dominance, about breaking him down in front of witnesses. Every time you stop, every time you take a break, you start the count over, Logan added. We want to see you push yourself to actual failure. Eli's mind raced through his options. He could refuse and walk away, but that would only make things worse. He could try to fight his way out, but Logan was massive and Chase was a skilled wrestler. Fine, Eli said, surprising himself. But when I'm done, this is over. Deal, Chase said, though his smile suggested he had no intention of honoring any agreement. Eli removed his backpack and hoodie, revealing the lean but defined muscle structure his baggy clothes usually concealed. The scars on his forearms were more visible now, and he saw Chase and Logan exchange meaningful glances. Knife fights? Logan asked casually. Accidents, Eli replied, though he knew they didn't believe him. He positioned himself in the center of the mats, assuming proper push-up form. Ready? Chase asked, pulling out his phone to record. Eli nodded and began. The first 50 push-ups came easily, his body settling into the familiar rhythm. He had done this routine thousands of times under Uncle Ray's watchful eye. 50, Chase announced. Neutrally. Eli continued, his form remaining perfect even as fatigue began to creep into his shoulders. 60, 70, 80 push-ups. The watching students had fallen silent. Damn, one of them muttered. He's not even breathing hard, but Eli was beginning to feel the strain. His muscles burned with lactic acid buildup, and his breathing was becoming more labored. Still, he had been trained to work through such discomfort. 90, 100, 110 push-ups. He was approaching his previous day's performance, but Chase and Logan showed no signs of being satisfied. Keep going, Chase ordered. We want to see you break. Eli pushed through 120, 130. His form was beginning to deteriorate slightly, his breathing becoming ragged. But Uncle Ray's voice echoed in his mind. Pain is temporary, but quitting is forever. At 140 push-ups, Eli's arms began to shake. The burn had become screaming. Agony and sweat dripped onto the mat. But he continued, driven by stubborn pride and the knowledge that showing weakness would only make things worse. Look at him go, Logan said, but there was no admiration in his voice. Like a machine, 150 push-ups. Eli's vision was beginning to blur at the edges, and his form was breaking down noticeably. But he pushed through, drawing on reserves forged in much harder circumstances. Enough, Chase said suddenly. Stop. Eli collapsed onto the mat, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. His arms felt like rubber, and his entire upper body was on fire. Impressive, Chase admitted, though his tone suggested he was far from finished. But that was just the warm-up. Eli looked up from the mat, confusion and growing alarm in his eyes. See, the thing about push-ups is that they're just one measure of fitness, Chase continued. What we really want to know is how you handle pressure, real pressure. Logan stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over Eli's prone form. Time for the real test. What do you mean? Eli asked, struggling to his feet. Simple, Chase said. You just did 150 push-ups, which is impressive. But what happens when you have to do them again? And again? How many times can you push yourself to failure before you actually break? The systematic nature of their plan became clear. This wasn't just about testing his strength. They were trying to destroy his will, to break him down until he begged. Then to stop. I already showed you what I can do, Eli said, trying to keep his voice steady. No, Chase replied, his false friendliness disappearing. You showed us what you could do when you were fresh. Now we want to see what you're made of when you're tired, when you're hurting, when you've got nothing left. The two students Eli didn't recognize moved closer, forming a loose circle. One held up his phone to record, while the other watched with bored familiarity. This is how it works, Chase continued. You're going to do push-ups until you physically can't do anymore. Then you're going to rest for exactly 1 minute, And you're going to do it again. And if I refuse? Then things get much worse, Logan said, stepping closer. Right now this is just between us. But if you don't play along, your business becomes everyone's business. And trust me, there are people at this school who would love to know more about your background. Any investigation into his background would inevitably lead to Marcus, to the gang violence, to the circumstances that had forced their family to flee. His mother had worked too hard to build a new life for them. How many rounds? Eli asked, hating himself for giving in. Until we're satisfied, Chase said with a cruel smile. Until we know exactly what kind of person you really are. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Fine, Eli said, lowering himself back into position. But this ends today. We'll see, Chase replied, checking his watch. Begin. Eli started his second set, his already fatigued muscles screaming from the first movement. The 150 push-ups had depleted his reserves, and now every repetition felt like lifting a mountain. But Uncle Ray's training had prepared him for this. The systematic breaking down of the body in service of building unbreakable will 20, 30, 40 push-ups. Eli's form was already deteriorating, his breathing labored and his arms shaking. But he continued, drawing on years of discipline. Look at him shake, Logan observed with satisfaction. Not so tough now. Shut up and let him work, Chase said. But his tone suggested he was enjoying the spectacle. 50, 60 push-ups. Eli's vision was beginning to blur, and his arms felt like they were on fire. But he had been through worse. The training sessions with Uncle Ray that lasted until he collapsed. The street fights where stopping meant serious injury. At 70 push-ups, Eli's left arm gave out completely. He collapsed onto the mat, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. The burn in his muscles had become screaming agony. 70, Chase announced with mock disappointment. That's a significant drop. I'm starting to think you're not as tough as you pretend to be. Eli lay on the mat, focusing on his breathing and trying to will strength back into his depleted muscles. 1 minute of rest, that was all he would get. Time, Chase said, far too soon. Eli struggled back into position, his arms barely able to support his body weight. He managed 10 push-ups before his right arm gave out. He collapsed again, his body refusing to respond. 10, Logan announced with satisfaction. Looks like the transfer student isn't so special after all. But as Eli lay on the mat, something shifted inside him. The familiar burn of exhaustion was still there, but underneath it was something else, a cold, focused anger that he had learned to control but never fully suppress. These two weren't just testing his physical limits. They were systematically trying to break his spirit. 1 minute, Chase said, checking his watch again. Then we go again. Eli closed his eyes and tried to center himself, drawing on techniques Uncle Ray had taught him. Boxing isn't just about your body, Ray had always said. It's about your mind, your spirit. When your body gives out, that's when you find out who you really are. Time, Chase announced. Eli pushed himself up once more, his arms shaking violently. He managed 5 push-ups before collapsing again, his strength completely depleted. But instead of satisfaction, Chase and Logan looked almost frustrated. 5, Chase said, but his tone suggested this wasn't the outcome he had hoped for. You're not begging yet. Maybe we need to try a different approach, Logan suggested, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Eli struggled to his feet, swaying slightly from exhaustion. I did what you asked. We're done here. We're done when I say we're done, Chase replied, his mask finally dropping completely. See, the problem is that you're still acting tough. Still pretending like you're not completely at our mercy. What do you want from me? Eli asked, his voice hoarse. Respect, Logan said, stepping closer. An acknowledgement of how things work around here. And maybe some information about your background, Chase added. Those scars didn't come from accidents, and nobody gets that kind of strength without serious training. We want to know what you're hiding. Eli felt the familiar surge of panic. These weren't just bullies looking for entertainment. They were digging for information that could expose his family situation. There's nothing to hide, Eli said, but his voice lacked conviction. Bullshit, Logan said, grabbing Eli by the front of his shirt and lifting him slightly off the ground. You think we're stupid? You think we don't recognize a fighter when we see one? For a moment, Eli felt the old instincts kick in. Logan's grip put him in perfect position for a knee strike to the solar plexus, followed by an uppercut that would drop the larger boy instantly. His hands moved slightly, muscle memory, preparing for combat. But Uncle Ray's voice echoed in his mind. The moment you throw the first punch is the moment you become everything you're trying to escape. Let me go, Eli said quietly. Or what? Logan taunted, his grip tightening. You'll do something about it, Logan, Chase said sharply. Put him down. Logan looked confused but complied, releasing Eli and stepping back. Chase moved closer, his expression thoughtful. That's interesting, Chase said slowly. For just a second there, you looked like you knew exactly how to handle Logan, like you've been in situations like this before. Eli said nothing, but he could feel his carefully constructed facade crumbling. These two were more perceptive than he had given them credit for. Here's what's going to happen, Chase continued. Tomorrow, same time, same place. We're going to continue this little fitness evaluation until we get some honest answers about who you really are. And if I don't show up, then we take this public, Logan said with a cruel smile. Start asking questions around school. Maybe reach out to your old school, see what they know about Eli Cole and his family. The threat hit Eli like a physical blow. Any investigation would inevitably lead to Marcus, to the gang violence, to the circumstances that had forced their family to flee. Fine, Eli said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow. Excellent, Chase said, his false smile returning. Oh, and Eli? Don't think about getting anyone else involved. This stays between us, or the consequences become much more serious. As the group dispersed, leaving Eli alone in the empty gymnasium, he felt the weight of his situation settling over him like a shroud. He had tried to escape his past, to build a quiet, normal life in Ridgepoint. But the past had followed him anyway. Eli gathered his things and walked slowly toward the exit, his body aching from the extended punishment. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional exhaustion of having his defenses systematically dismantled. As he stepped into the late afternoon sunlight, Eli pulled out his phone and stared at Uncle Ray's contact information. Part of him wanted to call, to ask for advice, to admit that he was in over his head. But Ray had his own problems, a criminal record that made it difficult to find steady work, a past that was even more complicated than Eli's own. Instead, Eli pocketed the phone and began the long walk home. Tomorrow would bring another confrontation, another attempt to break his spirit and expose his secrets. And despite all his training, all his discipline, Eli wasn't sure how much more he could take before something inside him snapped. The quiet suburban streets of Ridgepoint stretched before him, peaceful and normal in the golden afternoon light. But for Eli, normalcy felt like a luxury he might never be able to afford. The violence he had tried to escape was catching up with him, and soon he would have to decide who he really wanted to be, the quiet, anonymous student he had tried to become, or the fighter that circumstances had forced him to be. As he turned the corner toward home, Eli caught sight of his reflection in a storefront window. His face was pale with exhaustion, his clothes disheveled from the gymnasium confrontation. But his eyes still held the focused intensity that Uncle Ray had recognized. Years ago, the look of someone who had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attempts to break his spirit. But tonight, Eli would rest, recover, and prepare for whatever came next. Because despite everything Chase and Logan had put him through, despite the systematic attempt to strip away his dignity and strength, one thing remained unchanged: Eli. Cole was still standing. And as long as he was standing, he still had a choice about who he wanted to be. Jordan Lee had always prided himself on being observant. As president of the chess club and a straight-A student, he noticed patterns that others missed: the way teachers favored certain students, how social hierarchies shifted based on seemingly minor events, and most importantly, when someone was in trouble. That's why he was still in the school library when he heard voices coming from the gymnasium. Jordan had stayed late to finish research for his history project, but the sound of confrontation drew his attention like a magnet. He knew that tone, the careful politeness that masked cruelty, the false friendliness that preceded violence. Quietly, Jordan made his way toward the east wing of the gym, his chess player's instincts telling him to observe before acting. What he saw through the small window in the door made his blood run cold. Eli Cole, his partner from yesterday's fitness assessment, was collapsed on the wrestling mats, surrounded by Chase Granger, Logan Phelps, and two other students Jordan didn't recognize. Jordan pulled out his phone and began recording, his hands trembling slightly as he watched Eli struggle through what was clearly a systematic torture session disguised as athletic testing. The quiet transfer student who had impressed everyone with his 100 perfect push-ups was now being forced to perform until complete physical breakdown. 5, he heard Chase announce through the door as Eli collapsed for what appeared to be the third or fourth time. "You're not begging yet." Jordan's stomach churned as he watched Logan grab Eli by the shirt, lifting him partially off the ground. For a moment, it looked like Eli might fight back. There was something in his posture, a subtle shift that suggested he knew exactly how to handle the situation. But then the moment passed, and Eli remained passive. The conversation continued, but Jordan could only catch fragments through the door. Something about tomorrow, about keeping things private, about consequences. When the group finally dispersed, Jordan quickly retreated to the library, his mind racing with what he had witnessed. He knew he should report what he had seen, but he also understood the unspoken rules of high school survival. Students who reported bullying often found themselves becoming the next targets. Chase and Logan had made it clear that this was supposed to remain private, and crossing them would have serious consequences. But as Jordan sat in the empty library, staring at the video on his phone, he couldn't shake the image of Eli's face during those final moments. There had been something in the transfer student's eyes, not fear, exactly, but a kind of resigned determination that suggested this wasn't his first experience with systematic harassment. Jordan had always been a coward when it came to confrontation. He preferred the safety of books and chess problems to the messy complications of real-world conflict. But something about what he had witnessed felt different, more serious than typical high school bullying. He made a decision that surprised even himself. Jordan would document everything, build a case with evidence that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. If things escalated, and his instincts told him they would, he would be ready to act. Uncle Ray Cole had seen enough broken fighters to recognize the signs. When Eli walked through the front door of Ray's small apartment that evening, moving like every muscle in his body was screaming, the older man knew something had gone seriously wrong. "Rough day at school?" Ray asked, not looking up from the heavy bag he was rewrapping in the corner of his living room that doubled as a makeshift gym. "Something like that," Eli replied, dropping his backpack by the door and collapsing onto the worn couch. Ray studied his nephew's face in the dim light filtering through the apartment's single window. At 52, Ray had the weathered look of someone who had lived hard and learned harder. His hands bore the permanent marks of a former boxer scarred knuckles, slightly crooked fingers, and the kind of calluses that never fully disappeared. You want to talk about it, or you want to hit something? Ray asked, recognizing the familiar tension in Eli's posture. I don't know, Eli said honestly. Maybe both. Ray nodded and gestured toward the heavy bag. Wrap your hands first. Whatever's eating at you, take it out on leather, not people. As Eli began the familiar ritual of wrapping his hands, muscle. Memory taking over despite his exhaustion, Ray could see the internal struggle playing out across his nephew's face. The kid was carrying too much weight, trying too hard to be someone he wasn't. You know what your problem is? Ray said, settling into his favorite chair. You're trying to be invisible, but you're too good at everything to hide. Eli paused in his rapping. What do you mean? I mean you can't turn off 15 years of training just because you want a normal life, Ray continued. When I taught you to move, to fight, to push your body beyond its limits, I didn't just teach you skills. I taught you how to be a different kind of person. And that person doesn't just disappear because you move to the suburbs. I don't want to be that person anymore, Eli said quietly. Maybe not, Ray agreed. But pretending you're someone else won't make the real you go away. It'll just make you miserable, and eventually, it'll make you dangerous. Eli began working the heavy bag, his movements precise despite his fatigue. Each punch carried the weight of his frustration, his anger at the situation he found himself in, his fear of becoming the violent person he had tried so hard to leave behind. Tell me what happened, Ray said after several minutes of watching Eli work through his emotions on the bag. Between punches, Eli told the whole story, the fitness assessment, the confrontation in the library, the systematic torture session in the gymnasium. Ray listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. And they want you back tomorrow? Ray asked when Eli finished. Yeah, same time, same place. They said if I don't show up, they'll start digging into my background. Ray was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. They're not just bullies, he said finally. They're predators. They've identified you as someone worth breaking, and they won't stop until they either break you or you make them stop. I can't fight them, Eli said, his voice barely above a whisper. If I fight, I become everything we moved here to escape. Mom worked too hard to build a new life for us. Who said anything about fighting? Ray asked, standing up and moving to the bag. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to be broken. Sometimes the most powerful response is showing them that their methods don't work on you. What do you mean? Ray began demonstrating a series of breathing exercises, techniques. He had learned not just from boxing but from his time in prison, where survival often depended on mental rather than physical strength. You've been thinking about this all wrong, Ray continued. You think if you show them what you can really do, you'll become the monster. But you're already showing them what you can do. You're showing them that you can't be broken. That's the most dangerous thing of all to people like that. They're going to keep pushing, Eli said. Probably, but here's the thing about bullies, they need victims. If you stop being a victim, if you stop giving them the reaction they want, they'll eventually move on to easier targets. And if they don't? Ray's expression became serious. Then you make sure you're ready for whatever comes next. But you do it on your terms, not theirs. The next afternoon found Eli back in the gymnasium, but this time he wasn't alone. Hidden in the equipment room, Jordan Lee crouched behind a stack of gymnastics mats, his phone positioned to capture everything that was about to unfold. Chase and Logan were waiting in their usual positions, but today they had brought reinforcements. 3 additional students stood around the wrestling mats, creating a more intimidating presence than before. Back for more? Chase asked as Eli approached, his tone carrying false surprise. I have to admit, I wasn't sure you'd show up. I'm here, Eli said simply, his voice steadier than it had been the previous day. Logan stepped forward, cracking his knuckles in anticipation. Good, because today we're going to find out what you're really made of. But as Eli removed his hoodie and positioned himself on the mats, Jordan noticed something different about him. The transfer student's movements were more controlled, more deliberate. There was a calmness to him that hadn't been there before, as if he had made some kind of internal decision overnight. "Same rules as yesterday," Chase announced. "Push-ups until failure, 1 minute rest, repeat until we're satisfied." Eli nodded in assumed position, but this time he began differently. Instead of the explosive start he had demonstrated in gym class, he paced himself, finding a sustainable rhythm that would allow him to maintain form longer. "Begin," Chase ordered. Eli started his count, but Jordan could see the difference immediately. The transfer student was breathing differently, moving differently. This wasn't about proving his strength anymore. This was about endurance, about outlasting whatever they could throw at him. 20, 30, 40 push-ups. Eli's form remained perfect, his breathing controlled. But more importantly, his expression was calm, almost meditative. He had found a zone where physical discomfort couldn't touch him. "He's not struggling," one of the new students observed, sounding confused. "Give him time," Logan replied, but there was uncertainty in his voice. 50, 60, 70 push-ups. Eli continued his steady pace, showing no signs of the desperate struggle that had marked his previous performance. He had learned to work within his limits rather than pushing beyond them. Chase's expression was becoming darker by the minute. This wasn't going according to plan. The systematic breakdown that had worked so effectively the day before was being neutralized by Eli's new approach. "Faster," Chase ordered. "This isn't an endurance test, it's a strength test." But Eli ignored the command, maintaining his steady rhythm. He wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. He was simply demonstrating that he couldn't be broken by their methods. At 100 push-ups, Eli stopped and rose to his feet smoothly, barely winded. The contrast to his previous day's performance was stark. Instead of collapsing in exhaustion, he stood calmly waiting for their next move. 100, he announced to Chase, his voice steady. Chase's face flushed with anger. "That's not how this works. You do push-ups until you collapse, not until you decide to stop." "I did push-ups," Eli replied calmly. "You didn't specify that I had to collapse." Logan stepped forward aggressively. "Don't get smart with us, transfer boy." But Eli's expression remained unchanged. "I'm not getting smart. I'm just not getting broken." From his hiding place, Jordan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in Eli's tone, a quiet confidence, that suggested the balance of power was shifting. 1 minute rest, Eli said, settling into a meditative position on the mat. "Then we continue." Chase looked at Logan, confusion and frustration clear on both their faces. Their victim was refusing to be victimized, turning their torture session into something else entirely. "This isn't over," Chase said, his voice carrying a new edge of desperation. "No," Eli agreed, looking up at him with eyes that held no fear. "It's not." Coach Navarro had seen enough troubled kids to recognize when someone was carrying more weight than they should. When he noticed Eli Cole walking differently, moving with the controlled precision of someone managing significant pain, his military instincts kicked in. "Cole," he called as Eli was leaving the locker room after their regular gym class. "Need to speak with you for a minute." Eli paused, his expression guarded. "Yes, sir?" "You've been moving like someone who's been through hell lately," Coach Navarro observed, his tone direct but not unkind. "Want to tell me what's going on?" "I'm fine, Coach," Eli replied automatically. "Bullshit," Navarro said bluntly. "I've seen combat injuries, training injuries, and abuse injuries. You're showing signs of systematic physical stress. Either you're training like a maniac outside of school, or someone's putting you through something you shouldn't have to handle alone." Eli was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Uncle Ray had always taught him to be careful about who he trusted, but there was something about Coach Navarro's directness that felt genuine. "It's complicated," Eli said finally. Most things worth talking about are, Navarro replied. But here's the thing, I'm responsible for the physical safety of every student in my classes. If someone's targeting you, that's my problem too. From across the gymnasium, Jordan Lee watched the conversation unfold. He had been waiting for the right moment to approach someone in authority about what he had witnessed, but he hadn't been sure who to trust. Seeing Coach Navarro talking seriously with Eli made his decision easier. Jordan approached quietly, his phone clutched in his hand like evidence in a trial. "Coach Navarro?" Jordan said hesitantly, "I think there's something you need to see." Both men turned to look at the chess club president, who rarely spoke unless called upon in class. "What is it, Lee?" Navarro asked. Jordan looked at Eli, then back at the coach. "I recorded something yesterday. In here, after school. I think Eli is being systematically targeted by other students." Eli's face went pale. "Jordan, no." Jordan said, his voice gaining strength. "This has gone too far. What they're doing to you isn't normal bullying. It's torture." Coach Navarro's expression darkened. "Show me." Jordan pulled out his phone and played the video he had captured the previous day. The audio was muffled, but the images were clear enough, Eli being forced through repeated sets of push-ups until complete exhaustion, Logan grabbing him by the shirt, Chase orchestrating the entire session like a sadistic conductor. "When was this taken?" Navarro asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Yesterday, around 3:30, Jordan replied. "And they made him come back today. I have video of that too." As they watched the second video, Coach Navarro's jaw clenched visibly. Eli's calm endurance strategy was clear, but so was the escalating frustration of his tormentors. "This stops now," Navarro said firmly. "Both of you, my office. We're calling Principal Marlowe and getting this handled immediately." "Coach, please," Eli said desperately. "If this becomes official, they'll retaliate. They know things about my background that could hurt my family." Navarro studied Eli's face carefully. "What kind of things?" Eli was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the weight of someone sharing a burden he had carried alone for too long. "My brother's in prison. Gang-related assault charge. We moved here to get away from that life, to start over. If Chase and Logan start digging into my past, asking questions about why we really left our old school, the implications hung in the air." Coach Navarro had seen this pattern before, families trying to escape cycles of violence, only to find that their past followed them in unexpected ways. "That doesn't change what's happening to you now," Navarro said, "and it sure as hell doesn't excuse what they're doing. But it explains why they're doing it," Jordan added quietly. "They sense that Eli's different, that he's hiding something. They're trying to break him down until he reveals whatever they think he's concealing." Eli looked between the two of them, feeling the weight of his carefully constructed anonymity crumbling. But for the first time since the harassment began, he didn't feel alone. "There's something else," Eli said quietly. "I know how to fight, really fight. My uncle trained me in boxing since I was 8 years old, not for sport, for survival. And every day they push me like this. Every day they try to break me down. I get closer to doing something I can't take back." Coach Navarro nodded slowly, understanding the real danger in the situation. "That's exactly why we need to handle this through proper channels, before someone gets seriously hurt." "They won't stop," Eli said. "Even if you report them, even if they get suspended, they'll find other ways to get to me. People like Chase and Logan don't give up, they escalate. Then we make sure they understand the consequences of escalation," Navarro replied grimly. "And we make sure you're protected while we do it." Jordan looked between them, his analytical mind working through the possibilities. "What if we turned their own methods against them?" he suggested. "What if instead of hiding Eli's abilities we made them public, hard to target someone when everyone's watching?" Coach Navarro raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" The school wrestling tournament is next month, Jordan continued. Guest participants are allowed. What if Eli demonstrated his real capabilities in an official setting, where his skills become an asset rather than a secret to be exploited? Eli shook his head. I'm not a wrestler. I'm a boxer. Boxing uses different muscles, different techniques, Navarro said thoughtfully. But the conditioning, the mental discipline, transfers. And it would certainly change how people see you. It would also change how I see myself, Eli said. Quietly, I came here to escape violence, not embrace it. Sometimes the only way to escape something is to face it on your own terms, Coach Navarro replied. The question is, are you ready to stop running? As the three of them stood in the empty gymnasium, surrounded by the equipment and mats where Eli had been systematically tortured, a new possibility began to take shape. Not escape, not hiding, but confrontation controlled, public, and entirely. On Eli's terms, the quiet transfer student who had tried so hard to remain invisible was about to step into the light. And when he did, everyone would finally see what Chase and Logan had been trying so desperately to uncover. The question was whether Eli was ready to become the person his circumstances demanded him to be. Principal Marlowe sat behind her mahogany desk, her fingers steepled as she reviewed the evidence spread before her. Jordan's video footage played on her laptop screen for the third time, the sound of systematic harassment filling her office. Coach Navarro sat to her left, his military bearing evident in his rigid posture, while Eli occupied the chair directly across from her desk. This is deeply troubling, Principal Marlowe said finally, closing the laptop. What I'm seeing here goes far beyond typical student conflict. This appears to be systematic psychological and physical abuse. Eli shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I just want it to stop, ma'am. I don't want to cause trouble for anyone. Mr. Cole, trouble has already been caused, Principal Marlowe replied firmly. The question now is how we address it appropriately. Coach Navarro has explained your concerns about retaliation and privacy. I want you to understand that we take those concerns seriously. But, Eli asked, sensing there was more. But we also have a responsibility to ensure the safety of all our students, she continued. What Mr. Granger and Mr. Phelps have done constitutes harassment, possibly assault. If we don't address it properly, it will escalate. Coach Navarro leaned forward. Principal Marlowe, I've proposed an alternative approach. Rather than purely punitive measures, what if we address this through official channels that also provide Mr. Cole with a platform to demonstrate his capabilities in a controlled environment? The wrestling tournament, Principal Marlowe said. Thoughtfully, you're suggesting we turn this into a teaching moment. More than that, Navarro replied. I'm suggesting we give Eli the opportunity to face his tormentors on equal terms, in public where the entire school can see who he really is. Eli felt his stomach tighten. I told you I'm not a wrestler. Boxing and wrestling are completely different disciplines. You're right, Navarro acknowledged. But what Chase and Logan are really trying to do is establish dominance through physical intimidation. They've chosen you as their target because they think you're weak, defenseless. Demonstrating otherwise publicly and officially changes the entire dynamic. Principal Marlowe studied Eli carefully. Tell me about your boxing background, Mr. Cole. Eli was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the weight of someone sharing the carefully guarded secret. My Uncle Ray trained me from age 8, not for competition, for survival. We lived in a rough neighborhood, and my brother. He paused, then continued. My brother got involved with gangs. The boxing was supposed to keep me out of that life. And did it? Yes and no, Eli replied honestly. It kept me from joining gangs, but it also made me dangerous. When you know how to hurt people, really hurt them, every confrontation becomes a choice about who you want to be. Principal Marlowe nodded slowly. And who do you want to be, Mr. Cole? Someone who doesn't solve problems with violence. Eli said immediately. Someone who can build a normal life without constantly looking over his shoulder. Admirable goals, she agreed. But sometimes the path to peace requires demonstrating strength, not to intimidate others, but to establish that you cannot be intimidated. Coach Navarro pulled out a folder from his briefcase. I've been researching the tournament rules. There's a provision for exhibition matches demonstrations of different fighting disciplines. We could arrange for a boxing demonstration, with Eli showcasing proper technique and conditioning, in front of the entire school? Eli asked, his voice barely above a whisper. In front of everyone who matters, Navarro confirmed. Including Chase and Logan, once they see what you're really capable of. Once they understand that their intimidation tactics don't work because you're genuinely stronger than they are, this stops being fun for them. Principal Marlowe leaned back in her chair. There's another consideration here. Mr. Lee's footage provides clear evidence of harassment. I could suspend Mr. Granger and Mr. Phelps immediately, file formal complaints, involve their parents and potentially law enforcement. But Eli sensed another condition coming. But that approach often creates martyrs and underground retaliation, she continued. Whereas public demonstration of your capabilities, followed by a clear message about consequences for future harassment, tends to be more educational for all involved. Eli looked between the two adults, feeling the weight of their expectations. What exactly are you proposing? Coach Navarro opened his folder and spread several documents across the principal's desk. Next Friday, during the wrestling tournament, we announce a special exhibition. Boxing conditioning and technique demonstration by transfer student Eli Cole. You show the school what real training looks like, what real discipline produces. And Chase and Logan will be in the audience, Principal Marlowe said with a slight smile, along with their teammates, their friends, and everyone else who's been wondering about the quiet transfer student who can do impossible push-ups. Ali stared at the documents, his mind racing through the implications. Everything he had worked to hide, everything he had tried to escape, would be laid bare in front of hundreds of students. What if I refuse? He asked quietly. Then we handle this through traditional disciplinary channels, Principal Marlowe replied. Suspensions, formal complaints, the whole bureaucratic process, which may or may not solve the underlying problem. And if I agree, then you take control of your own narrative, Coach Navarro said. Instead of being the victim of Chase and Logan's investigation, you become the author of your own story. Eli closed his eyes, hearing Uncle Ray's voice in his mind. Sometimes the only way through is forward, champ. Sometimes hiding just makes you a better target. I need to think about it, Eli said finally. Of course, Principal Marlowe replied, but Mr. Cole? Whatever you decide, this harassment stops now. I'll be speaking with Mr. Granger and Mr. Phelps this afternoon, making it clear that any further contact with you outside of normal academic interactions will result in immediate suspension. They won't like that, Eli observed. No, she agreed. They won't. Which is why your decision about the exhibition becomes even more important. You can either face their anger from a position of strength or from a position of continued vulnerability. As Eli left the principal's office, his head was spinning with possibilities and consequences. He had 3 days to decide whether to step into the light or remain in the shadows. 3 days to choose between the safety of anonymity and the power of truth. Uncle Ray's apartment had been transformed into a war room. Boxing equipment that had been stored in closets was now spread across every available surface. Heavy bags, speed bags, focus mitts, and jump ropes created an obstacle course of training gear that spoke to decades of serious athletic preparation. You sure about this, champ? Ray asked as he helped Eli wrap his hands for their evening training session. Once you step into that spotlight, there's no going back to being invisible. I'm not sure about anything, Eli replied honestly, but I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of letting Chase and Logan control my life because I'm too scared to show them who I really am, Ray nodded approvingly. Good. Fear makes you careful, but it shouldn't make you paralyzed. Now, if you're really doing this exhibition, we need to make sure you're ready to show them something they'll never forget. For the next 2 hours, they worked through combinations that showcased not just Eli's power, but his precision, speed, and tactical intelligence. Uncle Ray had fought professionally for 12 years before his legal troubles ended his career, and he understood how to make boxing look like an art form rather than simple violence. Remember, Ray said as Eli worked the heavy bag, this isn't about intimidation, it's about demonstration. You want them to see discipline, control, skill. You want them to understand that what you do comes from years of training, not anger. What if they try to challenge me afterward? Eli asked between combinations. Then you remind them that boxing and fighting are two different things, Ray replied. Boxing is a sport with rules, referees, and safety equipment. Fighting is what happens when those protections don't exist. They don't want to find out the difference. The apartment door opened, and Eli's mother, Sarah Cole, walked in from her shift at the hospital. She stopped short when she saw the boxing equipment spread throughout her living room. What's all this? She asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Eli paused his training, suddenly aware of how the scene must look to his mother, all the equipment, the intensity of the training, the focused preparation that spoke to something more serious than casual exercise. Mom, we need to talk, Eli said quietly. Sarah sat down heavily on the couch, her nurse's uniform wrinkled from a long day of caring for others. Is this about the problems at school? The ones you've been trying to hide from me? Eli exchanged glances with Uncle Ray, who nodded encouragingly. How did you know? I'm your mother, Sarah replied simply. I know when you're carrying weight you shouldn't have to carry alone. And I know when Ray starts breaking out the serious training equipment, something significant is happening. Over the next 30 minutes, Eli explained everything, the fitness assessment that had exposed his abilities, the systematic harassment by Chase and Logan, the videos Jordan had captured, and the proposal from Principal Marlowe and Coach Navarro. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression cycling through concern, anger, and finally, a kind of resigned determination that Eli recognized from their decision to leave their old neighborhood. So you want to essentially announce to your entire school that you're a trained fighter, she said when he finished. I want to announce that I'm trained, period, Eli corrected. The fighting is just what happens when other people make poor choices. Sarah looked at her brother-in-law. Ray, what do you think? I think the boy's been hiding from himself for 3 years, Ray replied bluntly. And I think it's time he stopped apologizing for being good at something just because other people might misunderstand it. But the risks are the same whether he hides or not, Ray interrupted gently. Sarah, these kids aren't going to leave him alone because he's polite and quiet. They're going to keep pushing until something breaks. At least this way, he controls how the breaking happens. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the boxing equipment that represented both her family's past and potentially its future. Your brother thought he could control violence too, she said finally. Marcus thought violence was the answer to every problem, Eli replied. I think it's the last resort when every other answer has failed. And you think those other answers have failed? Eli considered the question carefully. I think hiding from who I am has failed. I think trying to be someone else to make other people comfortable has failed. I don't know if the exhibition will work, but I know what I'm doing now isn't working. Sarah stood up and walked to the heavy bag, running her hand along its worn leather surface. When your father was alive, he used to say that the most dangerous person in any room was the one who looked like they couldn't hurt anyone. What did he mean? Eli asked. He meant that real strength doesn't announce itself, she replied. It just is. And when it has to be used, it's devastating because no one saw it coming. She turned back to face her son and brother-in-law. If you're going to do this exhibition, you do it right. You show them skill, discipline, and control. You show them that what you are isn't something to be afraid of, it's something to be respected. Uncle Ray smiled approvingly. Now you're talking. But, Sarah continued, her voice taking on the firm tone that had gotten them through 3 years of rebuilding their lives. The moment this becomes about ego, the moment this becomes about proving you're tougher than someone else, we're done. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am, Eli replied. Good. Then let's make sure you're ready to show them something worth seeing. As they returned to training, Eli felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. For the first time in months, he wasn't hiding from his abilities or apologizing for his background. He was preparing to step into the light and show the world exactly who Eli Cole really was. The Ridgepoint High Gymnasium had been transformed for the annual wrestling tournament. Bleachers packed with students, parents, and faculty created an amphitheater of anticipation around the central mat area. The air buzzed with excitement as wrestlers from 3 different schools prepared for competition, but today's tournament would feature something unprecedented, a boxing exhibition that had the entire school talking. Eli stood in the makeshift prep area behind the bleachers, his hands already wrapped, wearing simple black athletic shorts and a gray tank top that revealed the lean, defined muscle structure his baggy clothes usually concealed. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't hiding. You ready for this, champ? Uncle Ray asked, checking Eli's hand wraps one final time. As ready as I'll ever be, Eli replied. Though his stomach was churning with nervous energy, Jordan Lee approached carrying a clipboard and wearing an official's badge. I'm helping coordinate the exhibition, he explained. Principal Marlowe. Thought it would be appropriate since I was the one who documented what led to this moment. Any sign of Chase and Logan? Eli asked. Front row, center section, Jordan replied grimly, along with most of the wrestling and football teams. Word got around that something significant was happening. Coach Navarro appeared, dressed in referee attire. Eli, you're up in 5 minutes. Remember, this isn't about proving anything to anyone except yourself. Show them what real training looks like. As they made their way toward the main gym floor, Eli could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes tracking his movement. Conversations died away as students who had never paid attention to the quiet transfer student suddenly realized they were about to see something extraordinary. Principal Marlowe took the microphone at center court. Ladies and gentlemen, as a special addition to today's wrestling tournament, we're pleased to present a boxing conditioning and technique demonstration by Junior Eli Cole. The gymnasium fell silent as Eli stepped onto the mat, Uncle Ray following with focus mitts and coaching equipment. Even the wrestlers from visiting schools stopped their warm-ups to watch. Mr. Cole has been training in boxing since age 8. Principal Marlowe continued. Today's demonstration will showcase the discipline, precision, and athletic conditioning that serious boxing training develops. Eli began with basic footwork, moving around the mat with the fluid grace that came from years of practice. His movements were economical, precise, each step deliberate and controlled. The difference between his usual hesitant demeanor and his movement in a boxing context was stark. Notice the balance, Uncle Ray called out, his voice carrying across the silent gymnasium. Every movement begins from a stable base. Technique before power, always. Eli transitioned into shadow boxing, his combinations flowing together in smooth sequences that demonstrated both speed and control. His breathing remained steady, his form perfect, each punch thrown with textbook precision. From the bleachers, murmurs of appreciation began to ripple through the crowd. Students who had dismissed Eli as weak or unremarkable were seeing something completely different, An athlete of exceptional skill and conditioning. Chase Granger sat frozen in the front row, his face pale as he watched the quiet student he had been systematically tormenting demonstrate abilities that put his own athletic achievements to shame. Logan Phelps stared with obvious shock, finally understanding why his intimidation tactics had failed so completely. "Now we'll demonstrate focus mid-work," Uncle Ray announced, pulling on the padded targets. "This requires precision, timing, and coordination between boxer and trainer." The sound of leather hitting leather echoed through the gymnasium as Eli worked through complex combinations with his uncle. Each punch landed exactly where intended, the rhythm building to a crescendo of speed and power that left the audience stunned. 150 push-ups, someone in the crowd whispered loudly enough to be heard. He did 150 perfect push-ups and barely broke a sweat. Eli heard the comment and smiled slightly, remembering the torture sessions that had brought him to this moment. Chase and Logan's systematic harassment had been intended to break him, but instead it had forced him to confront who he really was. For the final demonstration, Uncle Ray set up the heavy bag. "This will show the power that proper technique and conditioning can generate," he announced. Eli approached the bag with the same controlled precision he had shown throughout the exhibition. His punches weren't wild or angry, they were calculated, each one landing with the kind of force that made the heavy bag swing despite its weight. The sound filled the gymnasium, a rhythmic percussion that spoke to years of dedicated training. But more than the power, it was the control that impressed the audience. Every punch was exactly where Eli intended it to be, with exactly the force he chose to use. When he finished, the gymnasium erupted in applause. Students who had never acknowledged his existence were now on their feet, cheering for the quiet transfer student who had just demonstrated that there was far more to him than anyone had imagined. As Eli walked back toward the prep area, he passed directly in front of Chase and Logan. The two former tormentors sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting the dawning understanding that they had chosen the wrong target. "Impressive exhibition," Chase said quietly as Eli passed, his voice carrying none of its usual arrogance. Eli paused and looked down at the wrestling captain. "Thanks. Maybe next time you'll ask before assuming what someone is capable of." It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to hide their abilities. As Eli rejoined his uncle and Coach Navarro, he felt a fundamental shift in how the world saw him. He was no longer the victim of Chase and Logan's investigation. He was the author of his own story, the master of his own narrative. The quiet transfer student who had tried so hard to remain invisible had finally stepped into the light. And in doing so, he had discovered that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be exactly who you are. Without apology or explanation, the harassment was over. Eli Cole was finally free to be himself. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.